Yes, a warm hello from me today at our home in the Bikeschmiede. And today we have something quite curious again, certainly unique in this world. A self-built mobile work machine from the post-war period, from my childhood. With this wooden leg, in 1946, here the leg was missing. The builder of this device returned from Russian war captivity and was only able to survive the war captivity because he made clothespins for the Russian women near the camp. So he saw from his camp that the laundry was always flying away, and then he carved a pin out of a piece of wood, and then the women could pin their laundry. The laundry no longer flew away, and he received extra rations for himself and his buddies because he was already employing 3 people with it. Yes, and then he arrived back here in Germany. He inspected the ash pits because there were only 2 possibilities to find something useful, the dumps or the ruins, and found this remnant of a car. Here is still a piece of the bodywork, and the chassis was still attached, and it was from an Opel. Year of manufacture 28. 4 doors. You can still see here the lock of the second door, and you dragged the comb home. With much effort, you jumped so high, with joy. Hooray, we found half a car. It was incredible. And then they started to build, and indeed something meaningful. And it was meaningful to have something where you could convert your work into food. That's why most people in the post-war period were traveling in the villages, looking for jobs with farmers and getting paid in kind. And he had the same idea. He said, well, from this leftover of a car, I'll build myself a usable, drivable work machine to get my clan through the time of hunger. First, he built an evaporator engine on it. The evaporator has 2 advantages for this purpose. It is a stationary engine, therefore it doesn't need airflow. And it already has a centrifugal cruise control in the form of a centrifugal governor. That means you could adjust the engine via the throttle, so that it always maintained the same constant revolutions. And with that, it was of course easy for all the machines he had attached to it to always maintain a constant speed. So if it got difficult somewhere, the engine automatically adjusted to maintain the speed. And when it got easier again, it didn't over-rev, but instead adjusted back down. And now such an engine was originally started with a crank. And here is this crank. So you had a driver there, and then you could start the engine with it. Crank it up. The problem was just you had to be able to do it. Why? Because the engine naturally has strong compression, and you had to. That's why all these engines also have the flywheel. You got the flywheel up to speed, then close the compression lever, and with the flywheel, you could turn the engine over the dead center to ignition. And that was only possible with a lot of practice, because it also liked to kick back, as there was no ignition timing. There was only the compression pressure and then the so-called fuse, which was introduced into the engine. This is a fuse-soaked paper which started to ignite at a certain pressure, and of course you couldn't precisely determine when that was. So the momentum had to carry over the moment, turn up to the top dead center. We modified the engine for convenience reasons to a glow plug, and also because it's hard to find good fuses anymore. And we only slightly changed the thread and took a new glow plug from a car, which works just like the very old one. That might have been installed here with a glow filament, but originally for cranking up and with a fuse. And then, of course, also the possibility to prevent the turning, and we installed a small starter on it. And that, of course, makes the whole thing easier. Consequently, you also need a battery. We then installed the battery in the passenger compartment under the seat bench, wired everything a bit, and then over here we placed a starter switch with which you can start the engine. Yes, and here there are two nice little levers, one for the throttle, which in this case was extended with a Bowden cable and led into the passenger compartment. And then down here another lever for the compression, for the disengagement of the compression valve. And when you turn the engine, as mentioned, it was initially quite easy. And when the engine's compression lever went down here, it was no longer so easy to turn because you now had the compression pressure. And you could already tell now it's over. That means it became difficult. And the same principle was used by the Lance Bulldog. And the Lance Bulldog had a pre-chamber, and then the steering wheel was used to crank it. And for those who couldn't do it properly, here in the village there were two people whose upper arms were torn out by the Lance Bulldog because they didn't get the steering wheel out of the drive element in time. Here's a nice air filter, also very simple. Hold here. It was often moistened a bit with oil and stayed there for a lifetime. So now he had the engine on it. And then built a lot of useful machines onto it, where he could help the farmers. Here we have a grinding wheel first. It was connected over this flat belt pulley with the upper running wheel, but it could also be removed, and you could use this wheel to drive a threshing machine optionally. And here they sharpened hoes, sharpened knives, sharpened axes, and it also looks like he sharpened some knives or hoes with it. Here I have something nice as well. To illustrate it once more, this is the head of the engine. Here we have the valves. The problem, so here is the space for the glow plug or the fuse. This engine was indestructible. There was only one weak point, and that was the engine ran with water cooling. And when the people who had such things forgot to drain the water before winter, glycol and such things didn't exist back then. Then the heads often froze from the other side. And here we have such an example. It was then welded here, and you were lucky if it froze outward because you could weld here. If it broke inward, then the engine was of course done for, or the head was no longer usable. And here I also have something nice from the internals. Actually, the heart. The injection pump, this cam ran on a crankshaft, was compressed together. Inside here is a plunger, which was machined to zero tolerance, and it pumped the diesel entering here through with about 160 atmospheres of overpressure. And that then lifted the injection nozzle and activated the injection nozzle, and then atomized the diesel very finely, and then it could ignite there when the piston came up and the glow plug had worked. That means it was glowing. Call for it. Then let's take another look here. We have another nice piece here. After the war, this was a gold machine, namely a homemade rapeseed and a poppy seed oil press. Here, rapeseed or poppy seeds were put in. Then the belt went down here to the central drive shaft. And then it was adjusted here. How much do you want to squeeze out? And then the oil came out of the holes here. You can still see it ran down here into the bucket that stood here. And here the squeezed dry stuff came down and fell into the bucket. And just with this thing alone, one should kneel down in awe. The man managed it in 1946 to drill 34 holes into this piece of pipe, which has approximately a 7 millimeter wall thickness. using a 0.4 mm drill bit. And 0.4 is extremely thin. And not with 10,000 revolutions like we drill today, but with a hand drill. And if I were to imagine telling a locksmith or a locksmith apprentice today to use a hand drill and a 0.4 mm drill bit to drill a hole, no one would be able to do it anymore. Here he also has a signal horn, an old Bosch horn, because it was very important that, of course, when he was driving with the thing, he could also warn people who were on the street, and that's why he made it triple secure. First, the Bosch horn here, then he also had a small siren here, and here, a self-made bell. There used to be, in my childhood, bicycle bells. They ran at the front wheel here, and with a strap you could pull them up here, and then they would come to the front wheel, and inside there were hammers, and they would hit against these small cams, and then you had a continuous ringing sound. And he certainly liked that, or he could remember it and recreated this principle here. You can see the drive wheel, which is here. This is it. And here he attached the hammers, a few hammer parts, self-made in a joint so that they could strike here and also bend away. And with centrifugal force, they would then hit against this old pipe sleeve. And then it produced a ringing sound. Yes, now we can take a look at a few things hanging around outside here that don't necessarily belong to the vehicles. And here is something that is coming back into fashion, namely a pattern roller for renovating the apartment. So you don't need wallpaper. You put paint in here, whitewash the wall, and then place the roller like this in it. And with the pattern, you could go over it with green or yellow or red. And then again with another color, and you had a beautiful speckled colorful wall. It's becoming very popular again. And from the Christmas goose. The wings were taken, so-called feather quills, to keep the workbench clean all over the workshop. So there was no need to buy a broom. Yes, let's move on to the passenger cell. Made of solid wood, tailored, because it was no longer there. There was the door. He built one himself from old planks. Here is a very beautiful wooden steering wheel. I can't say which type of vehicle it comes from. Then we have here a little lever. For the bell, you can see at the front how the wheel goes down, and consequently is driven by the flywheel. And here he has another lever for the siren, which is also leaned against the drive wheel so that it can operate. Here is the original tachograph. So he kept his schedule with it, a pencil with a homemade extension made from elderberry, because even a small piece of pencil was not thrown away. It was used up to the last centimeter. And here we have the turn indicators. So if you pulled on the left side here, the paddle came out on the left side. And if you pulled on the right, the paddle came out on the right. Otherwise, people used to hold it out like this. So this was already a small innovation from this tinkerer. Down here we have a very important lever. With a safety mechanism, you could pull it out and then you could either connect the shaft with the drive axle or with the work machines. It was that simple to switch back and forth. Yes, he also had a homemade bandsaw, so he could saw wood for the farmers. It looks a bit messy today because we don't have to go out today for sawing wood. Here you can nicely see the saw blade. And he could adjust it up or down depending on how large the logs were. And then one person would hand over the wood, he would cut it, and the other would throw it onto the pile. And here's another very important device for the farmers when they were slaughtering. Then he would tip out this device here. Specifically, this device was used between 9 and 10 p.m. when the farmers had slaughtered and the sausage was in the cans. Then he closed the cans closed. Here we still have the original lids for them. It was placed top here. You could adjust it here. Then it had to be turned up again. The right fit was like this. And then there was this pressing roller here. And then the lid was crimped around the edge of the can. The can was closed until Christmas or the next family celebration. And then the can was opened, and then there was sausage from the slaughter. And then he could pay it back in the device so that he was roadworthy again. When we discovered this device, it had already been standing for 16 years in the garden. A tree had already grown through here. And the wheels were grown over with dirt up to just below the axle in the dirt. Overgrown. So we first negotiated with the man for several years because he didn't want to give it away. And then we were able to convince him. So we drove up and wanted to pick up the thing. And then I said to my son, we'll take a compressor with us right away. Dad, the air won't hold anymore. So we can try that. And whether he believes it or not, it was standing there flat-footed. You can still see that the tires are a bit cracked there already. We took the compressor, pumped up the air, and it's still holding. These are all things that fascinate us here, that our ancestors were able to build things that worked for 50, 100 years and were unsurpassed in simplicity. And this is such a fossil from our ancestors' time. I think everyone who looks at this today will confirm that there's nothing like it. And this is the materialized spirit of our ancestors. And when I hear today, yes, what lasts long doesn't make money. Folks, it's exactly with that phrase that we've managed to get to where we are today. Everyone cheats everyone with shoddy work. And my slogan is, what lasts long saves the world. Because we would use half as much waste, half as much energy, and half as much work time to have the same standard of living as we have now. We are currently very focused on saving energy. Our forefathers could do that 60 and 70 years ago. No one needed to tell them. Saving was not a necessity of need, but a necessity of reason. And here the man. Just imagine cut wood for 2 or 3 hours. The exhaust went under this coffee kettle, and back then there was also a lid for it. And when he was done cutting wood, he immediately had hot water to brew himself a tea or coffee. So you certainly can't handle fuel more efficiently than that. And here is another nice piece. The windshield. He couldn't just call somewhere and say, "I need a new laminated glass pane now." The pane was broken. A screw went in, 2 rubber washers, and then he screwed it together so that the frame still held the panes together and he could keep driving. Well, we've talked enough. Now let's have some noble sounds. Shall we start the thing briefly, but just a short test run? We will drive the next day. I have to invite you again for that. So we have a battery in the passenger compartment. And here we have the starter switch. I'm now lowering the lever for compression. Advance the throttle a bit. And we need a fuse. For that we need the fuse holder. Here it is. And a fuse. So this now goes into the combustion chamber. Unfortunately, I have to say that the new fuses are not so invigorating. And therefore, we'll use a little trick. And help it a bit so it doesn't struggle for too long with a bit of starting spray. Yes, indeed.
Now I just want to demonstrate the bell and the horn to you again. Over there. Or alternatively, the siren.
And you'll notice when the compression is gone, then it won't ignite anymore. So in order for us to meet again tomorrow, I will quickly change my clothes. Yes, and so we'll meet again in the next few days for a test drive. Until then, bye, goodbye, take care.